Bonjour tout le monde, ici Sophie de l'Académie Shaoyin et aujourd'hui je vous présente notre 11e épisode de podcast dans lequel on reçoit Nigel Dawes et c'était un grand plaisir de le retrouver car on a étudié toutes les trois le Kampo, qui est l'herboristerie traditionnelle japonaise, avec lui et on discute du système nerveux et comment celui-ci peut être modulé grâce au Shiatsu, mais aussi à l'herboristerie et à l'acupuncture. Et pour vous mettre un petit peu en contexte, donc Nigel, lui, il a plus de 40 ans d'expérience dans ces 3 disciplines. Il a étudié à la base, au Japon et depuis toutes ces années, il enseigne et il continue d'ailleurs d'enseigner. Alors, c'est quelqu'un avec un grand cœur, mais aussi une très grande expérience, donc ça fait toujours des discussions très riches. Donc voilà, sans plus tarder, on y va.
Bonjour tout le monde, nous sommes aujourd'hui avec Nigel Dawes. Je suis très contente de vous présenter mon maître, ami et collègue, Shiatsu, thérapeute, acupuncteur et thérapeute en Kampo ou herboriste. Et il est une très belle personne que j'aime beaucoup et je vous la présente. Aujourd'hui, l'entrevue va être en anglais puisque c'est sa langue maternelle. Et je pense qu'on a déjà fait, par ailleurs, on a déjà fait des podcasts ou des entrevues avec lui. Peut-être vous les connaissez déjà un petit peu. Aujourd'hui, on va parler du système nerveux. Et ça vient d'une conversation que j'ai eue avec lui récemment où on parlait comment le shiatsu rend le système autonome en parasympathique rapidement et comment ça se passe. Donc, on va parler un peu de ça et d'autres choses aussi. On verra qu'est-ce qui s'en vient. Donc, bonjour Nigel, bonjour les filles. Très
Allô?
heureuse d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Je te laisse, Nigel, développer les sujets et rentrer dans cette conversation qu'on va développer. Qui sait comment? Juste la vie nous le dira.
C'est à moi de parler.
Yes.
Oui.
Now it's your turn. Now we can speak in English.
You can speak in English. I would love to speak in French, but I'm not sure that I can understand your Quebecois accent. That's the problem.
My Quebecois and Spanish and English accent all mixed together.
All of that mixed together. Plus, I know that the Quebecois French is supposedly the original French. So I'm just, imposter with my French, my European
French.
Anyway, yes, hello to everybody who might tune into this, and I really appreciate being invited to say a few words today about this subject. I'm very impressed with Sophie Lau and Martha's efforts in creating this forum. I've watched quite a few of the podcasts myself, so I just want to say that bravo to you guys for your strong efforts. These are times in which perhaps it would be easier to only do things or engage in things that have some kind of reward, let's say. This is quite normal these days. Unfortunately, nothing is given for nothing. But it seems to me that you're putting a lot of work into something that is very important. But I'm sure that in terms of reward, it's an internal and beautiful, emotional reward. I'm sure not a financial reward. So congratulations for, being different in that respect and committing to something that's really, truly valuable, in my opinion.
It's connection
And giving back too, as we get older, hopefully there is some desire to want to, contribute back because, there are younger people who are more interested and don't yet have the experience, and maybe you can offer them something once in a while.
Are you implying that I am getting older?
I'm not implying anything.
It's
But
our
don't
gray
worry,
hair
because
are showing now.
don't worry,
Wait,
because we all know the most ancient, person in this group, so that's all right. Age is nothing. Age is nothing. Although when I got my Medicare card in the post the other day, it was a little bit, yes, there was a moment there. Okay. Although now, of course, I can become and acquire senior status in
Yes, that's what I thought.
all kinds of environments, which is quite interesting. Yes. I went
The
to
perks.
I went to the theater last night. It was very inexpensive. It was nice.
Yeah. See?
So there you go.
You changed brackets. That's
In
great.
brackets.
Congratulations.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I like the perks. I don't necessarily like the label, but that's all right. So yeah, this topic of the nervous system in general, and specifically because the nervous system is, in the modern way of understanding it, has many different parts to it. But so we're specifically, or I was hoping specifically to focus on the autonomic nervous system, which I'm sure all of you understand is composed not only obviously of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. These are the two complementary and antagonistic aspects of how we function. That sounds familiar, right?
Our yin and yang.
Sounds like yin and yang to me, and we'll, I'll say a little bit more about that. But there is also the third part of the autonomic nervous system, which even in Western medicine, I think is a relatively recent attempt at describing phenomenon that occur, but they hadn't fully yet understood. And I'm talking now about what we call the enteric portion of the autonomic nervous system. So there really actually are not two, not binary, but three aspects of this system, which is kind of interesting. The enteric system, of course, refers to the vagus nerve and the vagal influence on the digestive system. So enteric basically refers to how we digest, which is entirely an autonomic, a parasympathetic function. But I'll get back to that later. So yeah, I thought to talk a little bit about this topic in terms of, on the theory side, just in terms of how it relates, in my mind at least, and in my practice, to literally to how we think about yin and yang, and how we use yin and yang to influence basically not to influence, but to understand and to give a context to almost everything we do, I think, both in practice with our bodies and our hands, but also with our mind and our understanding of our clients and patients and so on. It is a universal theory, as we know, and it's universally applicable. It's very simple, and perhaps some people might even say too simplistic, but there's nothing wrong with simple. I mean, it helps us to situate things and really appreciate the nuances and nature of not just the individual qualities of those two polarities, but of course, more importantly, maybe their interrelationship. How do they relate to each other?
Yes.
Separate, after all. So yeah. So we can talk about the sympathetic part. Well, let me back up a second. I mean, the autonomic nervous system as a whole used to be called the vegetative nervous system. They changed the name, actually. And I'm not surprised they changed it, because that doesn't sound kind of sounds a little bit kind of, I don't know what, vegetative. What, you mean like a vegetable or something? But of course, I think it's of course, we would understand how and why it used to be called that, because there is, in basic neurology and brain neurology in particular, there are these different parts of the brain, and the old brain, as it's often referred to, which is the hind brain, right, the brain stem, used to be referred to as the vegetative part of the brain. So I think that's why, and therefore what I'm saying there is what we know: the autonomic nervous system operates as a function of the hindbrain, which means it's very old. It's a part of our system that is, long before our frontal lobes started to fully develop, we had this stuff. And it was, you know, to me, the first image that comes to mind about that, and the first association, is related to meridians, because I have always felt that the meridians are functioning at that kind of hindbrain, early stage. I'll use the word primitive, but I don't mean primitive in any negative way. I mean early and basic and simple. So before we had such a capacity for a big frontal lobe potential and always kind of what we now call spleen, cognitive stuff and rationalization and all these amazing things that have brought human beings, you know, to the place we are, which is arguably, you know, good or not good. Nonetheless, it's happened as a result of this huge brain that we have. And the old brain is, it's always worth remembering, was the original part of our being. So I think meridians, whatever they are, and however they function, to my mind, they function like that. They are unconscious but continuous way in which the energy of our body gets distributed without us. No, we can bring our conscious mind to influence that chi. Certainly that's true. We know that from meditation and lots of other practices. But most of the time, it's happening without us being conscious. And that is always a body attempt to intuitively seek balance. And we call homeostasis, I guess, nowadays. So it's important, I think, to know that the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, is totally connected to that part of the way we function. It's not a conscious part of what we do. It's for the most part an unconscious part, but a very, very significant one, because on the one hand, we have the yang, the sympathetic side, that seeks always to respond to things, and in a very appropriate, often, and a very necessary way. The fight or flight that is intrinsic in that part of our nervous system is really important, because, you know, if you're in a dangerous situation, you don't have a lot of time to think about that. There needs to be something in your mechanism that immediately stimulates and prepares all kinds of functions in your body to react instantaneously. And your thinking and your thought process is too slow for that, basically. I'm talking about adrenaline. I'm talking about the heart rate and the respiratory rate and all the things that can change very, you know, in 1 second in response to perceived threat or danger or other things. But it's not only about fight and flight. It's also about the sympathetic system, that is. It's also about the constant need to sort of regulate up and down, to check things. The word that comes to mind is function. You know, it's the functional part of our autonomic nervous system, the part that we rely on to keep fine-tuning things and correcting things in a very sort of proactive way, which is why I've always associated that function with a yang function. You know, it's very overt and deliberate in its attempt to maintain balance. It's balanced by the parasympathetic system. And if we associate as I think we should do, because the whole system, the autonomic nervous system, governs organ function and, interestingly, endocrine function. And the hypothalamus, which is situated anatomically just above the brainstem, so it's in the same area, so it's part of that old brain. The hypothalamus is responsible for the integration of the nervous system, or the autonomic nervous system, and the endocrine system. To me, that is just such a beautiful and, you know, incredibly obvious image of how meridians work, because how do we think that, or how do we relate to the belief and the certainty, I think all of us as practitioners know from experience, that mind and body are related, right? I know this is very simplistic, but there are mechanisms in biology in our bodies that can be understood to explain how that works. That's just a Western context. It's not important. It's no more important or less important than the old language of East Asian medicine, which talks about yin and yang, and it talks about the Shen and the Qi and the Jing and the three treasures, and it talks about the three fluids or the five substances. This is all the same language, actually. But I've always been interested by modern medicine, modern physiology. I'm not interested in modern pathology, and I'm certainly not interested in modern treatments. But modern physiology, the understanding of physiology, I think is really, really, really important for us as practitioners, because there's a lot of detail there that East Asian medicine doesn't really consider, which is not a fault. It's not missing. One of the beauties, I think, of our history and our inheritance from these other parts of the world and the way they, treated illness and dealt with patients and clients is that it's a simpler system. And it is that it's very beautifully metaphorical. It's a lot of poetry and imagery in there that allows you a lot of freedom to interpret. And I think that's one of the strengths. But one of the strengths of modern physiology is its specificity. It's very specific and very detailed. So once I started some years ago to really get interested in physiology and study quite detailed and, myself, by myself, when I first came across this whole thing with the hypothalamus, which is not really very well known in terms of its function, and this connection between endocrine and nervous function, I mean, that spoke to me of, wow, so you have the yang of the body, which is basically like electricity. It's basically like the movement of qi and the promotion of functionality of every cell in our body. That's how things happen. That's how things get motivated, right? We talk about the motive force of yang and qi. And qi, of course, belongs to yang. But then, yin is not separate. There must be correlation and connection, even though there's polarity. So yin has to do with substance in the body, and all those substances that when they are communicating, so that I'm really talking now about hormones, mostly in chemistry, blood chemistry and hormones. This is the endocrine system. So this is the other part of, so for me, meridians are a beautiful and metaphorical description of the nervous system and the endocrine system and the circulatory system all in one. That's what they are for me. They if we cut the body, if we cut the body, we won't see them. But I believe it and still is an attempt to capture in this concept of a meridian the idea that these three systems are intrinsically and always linked together. And when you place a hand, even not on the body, but most of us on the body, but some people not on the body, you are bringing your energy in connection to another, and you are influencing those three systems, obviously and immediately and without fail. Now, how you influence them, that requires direction and some degree of intention, I guess you could say. And that's where another part of our brain comes in, actually. I think there are ways of working, and I'm sure we've all worked that way sometimes, which are very open-ended, and we sort of steer away from some kind of goal or intention. I know we usually refer to that, I think, as beginner's mind, right? And certainly I remember many of my early treatments in Shiatsu were like that. And there was something very beautiful about that, because my mind wasn't very cluttered with knowledge, because I didn't really know anything. I didn't know anything, but I was getting better at doing stuff, but I didn't know anything. So there is that level of working. But, there's also another level where, whilst maintaining the connection and the openness and not becoming too directed or too goal-oriented, that nonetheless we use a part of our being that does help us to focus on things and move in a certain direction. I think that's also inevitable. So that's actually a complement to the autonomic nervous system. It's more the front brain stuff, you know. Certainly in herbs, I think we do that a little more perhaps than in some of the contact, you know, work with shiatsu or with needles, you know, because herbs intrinsically requires you to, at some point, to abstract a little bit and think about stuff. And, you know, so there's those differences are even, I guess, symbolized within the different disciplines in our medicine, actually. As someone who does a few of them at the same time, it's kind of interesting for me to see my internal world moving in these different spaces at different times, which is honestly why I always try to keep one hat on at a time. If I'm doing shiatsu, I'm doing shiatsu. I'm not thinking about herbs, and vice versa in a way, because not that they're oppositional, but I think this yin and yang thing, yeah, when you're in one stage, then, or one state, then, you know, be in that state a little bit. But anyway, I got off the topic a little bit.
That was going to be my next question, so
yeah.
that's good, like how you relate that. But yeah, we can keep talking about the nervous system, and how do you see, because we were talking about how shiatsu brings the person in a parasympathetic state very quickly. So how does you think it happens?
Yeah, okay. Well, one of the associations I've always enjoyed about the parasympathetic is some you know, you read this in some of the literature, they talk about feed and breed and rest and digest, right? Those four things: feed and breed, rest and digest. This is kind of interesting because if we think about the Zhang Fu theory and the way that we look at the organs, the internal organs, and how we associate their different functions and also their interrelationships, whether you're using five-phase theory or whatever, Zhang Fu theory or whatever, it doesn't really matter. We also talk, don't we, about, you know, spleen, stomach, and kidney, for example, as having a strong relationship in relation to nutrition, acquired essence, right? And pre-heaven essence, which we talk about with the kidney and the stored essence. So feed and breed are a function of the parasympathetic system. Literally speaking, this becomes literal. For example, arousal and sexual arousal and stimulation and orgasm occur as a result of parasympathetic function. I'm sure you know that, but it's very specific. In fact, a lot of sexual dysfunction occurs because the person can't relax. That's, you know, parasympathetic system is about relaxing. It's a disinhibitory function. So it wants us to open out. Literally, the vessels deconstrict and relax. Literally, the energy flow. This, by the way, it's very tempting to assume that we're talking about, or we're value judging here, because all of this sounds rather nice, doesn't it? Like, I would want more of that. And I would want less of this sympathy. But wait a minute, how are you going to get up in the morning? How are you going to go to work? How are you going to make sure that when you want to eat, the spoon actually gets to your mouth? Yeah, this has got to happen too. So, and that's the sympathetic system. So these are not separate things. But yes, when we start to look at organ function and association to sympathetic and parasympathetic, it's really interesting. The heart and the lung essentially respond to sympathetic activity. We know that because if you're stimulated by something, your heart rate changes or your breathing rate changes. And so those functions are more related to the yang side of things, actually. They're very sensitive. They're easy to change. They can go up and they can come down. This is all yang in nature.
And it happens very quickly.
And it happens very quickly. Yes.
Quick.
Yes. Very quickly. And thankfully, it can change back again very quickly. So, you know, this has tremendous implications in our treatments, because the treatments that focus on qi, like shiatsu and acupuncture, for example, are very effective at those kinds of subtle regulations. So, you know, I'm sure you treat a lot of clients with anxiety disorders and sleep problems and these kinds of chi-based things, because they respond so quickly and so well to this delicate, and it's not necessarily only parasympathetic action. It can be both, actually, more stimulating or more tonifying treatments as opposed to more relaxing and sedating. But anyway, back to this organ relationship. So to me, the upper jiao, which belongs to yang, right, proportionally yang, these organs functions are very related to the sympathetic activity of the body. And when you move into the middle and the lower jiao, digestion and urogenital function, urination and defecation as well, by the way. I mean, obviously, think about it. In a young kid who's constipated, most of the time what it comes down to is just got to relax. Just got to relax. And that's a parasympathetic function. Same with urination. And certainly the same with sexual activity. So the parasympathetic connection to, yes, breeding and the continuation of the species and the libido and so on, and at the same time, the sustenance, the physical sustenance of the human body with food and the ability to freely and easily properly digest that food. These are very yin functions, and they belong to that part of our nervous system that allows them to happen. We all know, I'm sure, that one of the most common symptoms of stress-induced anxiety is digestive. A lot of people have unexplained digestive, and we know the mechanism. We know the vagus nerve, we know the cranial nerve connection, the vagus nerve connection to the intestines. In the meridian system, we have that connection very well described. We have the pericardium channel that moves straight through and down into the intestinal area. We have the chongmai. We have various different aspects of the meridian system that connect, yes, mental and emotional states to the digestion. So that shouldn't surprise us, I think. I think your question, Martha, was more on the treatment side, right? So, if we can get that about how our nervous system functions and how those two parts of it, well, three really, because like I said before, we have to include the enteric part. So the enteric part is uniquely the intestines and uniquely the vagus nerve. The parasympathetic is more generally the ability to let go and open and relax. And the sympathetic, of course, is the opposite, to get ready for something and to get ready to function, to your best potential and quickly. So if we think of those three systems and think of it like that, and then we move to the idea of treatment, whatever form it takes, working with another person, presumably, there's the qualities of each of those descriptions has to be transmitted through your work in order for you to achieve that particular effect. So if you want, there are sympathetic style treatments, and there are parasympathetic style treatments, and there are enteric treatments, actually, if you can think about it that way. And sometimes it has to do more with the particular modality as a whole. For example, I would say, to some degree, and this is interesting because it's almost a paradox with what Masunaga was suggesting in his work. I was going to say, though, that the chi-based therapies like acupuncture and shiatsu, for example, or bodywork, are almost intrinsically sympathetic, actually. Unless and until you bring a certain other quality to the nature of your pressure, which is exactly what Masunaga was doing. When he brought those three principles of pressure into his work and into his understanding, particularly that notion of continuous sustained pressure, in which the receiver is unable, with their mind at least, to distinguish what the hell's going on. So they don't know where your hands are. They don't know. They just feel the whole. That is very, very much a parasympathetic stimulation in my experience, both in doing it and receiving it. But I would say if you think, and it doesn't take much to think about some of the other styles of Shiatsu, Namikoshi, for example, or most of the other styles.
Like Twina, for example.
Like
Yeah.
Twina. And most body work, actually, historically, Matsunaga was very unusual like that. If you think about the history of body work, for the most part, it's very stimulating, actually. It stimulates quite easily. And it's more, but it involves more staccato movements. It involves, the manipulation of tissue and all that. That's sympathetic action, which itself is extremely useful. Let's not forget that. I mean, basic Swedish massage or deep tissue massage is amazing. It stimulates the nerve fibers. It stimulates blood flow. It does a lot of yang activity in the body, which can be hugely helpful. But Shiatsu, at least Zen Shiatsu, I think, has this almost opposite effect. It's got this amazing ability to just from the beginning, if you're in your own space, and we all know how sometimes it's difficult to get there right away, but if you're right from the very first touch, if you're in that space, their body starts to open straight away. Like it's like a flower just opening. And that has a different effect. That has its own effect. What I believe is happening there is it starts to relax the intestines almost immediately. And you can hear that, right? A lot of times you'll hear that happening. And that's the first thing that happens. But then vasodilation occurs naturally. Circulation is improved. So the effects of parasympathetic style touch are like that, as far as I can see. And they're not better or worse than another style. In fact, at different times in all of our lives, I'm sure we need one or the other, or sometimes both, but probably not both at the same time, because of where we're at, right? I happen to think, and I happen to agree with, I don't know if it's agreeing, but anyway, from what I understand of a lot of Masunaga's work, he was treating a lot of cancer patients. We know that, especially in his later life. And that's a very particular population. But I think earlier on in his career, his kind of rationale for developing that particular approach was based on his experience of working with very stressed out people in an urban environment, So I think his experience was most of his clients needed to relax, basically. They needed that parasympathetic thing, and some people don't. I can imagine some people need localized stimulation because something's stuck or stagnant and they need to move that, or some people just need a whole body invigoration because they're kind of like just that's a different kind of thing. Yeah.
Sorry, it's very interesting that what you are saying, because now I'm realizing that during my learning Shiatsu, the first period was very, Masunaga style, very parasympathetic. But then when I study acupuncture, and I add Twina, I was more in the more, sympathetic way. So I think I combine both. Sometimes it depends of the person that arrives, and I can, be more like, okay, let's go to calm this down. But sometimes I just said that there is some people that just need to, shake and wake up. So I use the other style, and it's I think it's very interesting it's just like food for the mind, to say, to say, oh, okay, that's maybe it has some sense that this is the mixture of what I've done is like maybe a Frankenstein, I don't know, but I think that's what I am doing now, combining these two aspects. But I don't know how to do is the mesenteric, like you say, it's like 3 system. That I don't know how it works.
No, that happens naturally as part of the parasympathetic response. So I'm in a way I shouldn't really separate. It's not really 3, it's like 1 and 2. Because parasympathetic, enteric is part of the parasympathetic. It's just a particular part, because we don't necessarily need to, and maybe not have time to get into the real details of physiology here, but because you're talking then about different kinds of nerve cells, and different
Mm.
kinds of chemicals that are released by those, right? And that trigger and also received by the, and that's what separates the way that those different parts of the nervous system work.
Mhm.
And for example, serotonin and dopamine and so on, they're very much a part of the parasympathetic system. But we don't, you don't have to go so detailed as that. But what you can say is that what happens in the gut and in the neuroreceptors in the gut, of which there are masses, like, they did, Western medicine was kind of almost had egg on its face and almost embarrassed, which it shouldn't be, because, the only reason it's embarrassed is because it's inherited this complete ridiculous fantasy that it can actually imagine that it understands everything. If it didn't start from that point, then it wouldn't be embarrassed at all, because of course there are always new things. And so the new thing in this case is, oh, the gut has all these nerve receptors in it. We didn't know that. And actually, they receive chemistry and chemicals from the endocrine system, which is not mediated by the central nervous system. In other words, like it has its own life. Oh, that's new. It's not new. That's not new. But my point here is the enteric system is part of the parasympathetic system. So they belong together. They're not separate. And then the sympathetic system is the antagonist, we could call it. That's how they work together. So yeah, enteric and parasympathetic belong to yin, and they work through that yin way of, when you receive a non-discriminatory sensory input. What I mean by that is, if let's take the quality of touch, if you have touch that is consistent and smooth and not staccato and doesn't change in its rhythm or strength, or that has a parasympathetic and an enteric effect, basically. Yes. I mean, we know that, right? I mean, sympathetic system itself responds to change. So in other words, the parasympathetic is no change. It's you doing something, but the experience of the other is no change. And the conscious mind of a sympathetically charged person will look up at you and say, what's that fly crawling on me? Nothing's happening. Because that's coming from their sympathetic, expectation of something that should, trigger something. You're supposed to do this, and then you feel this. But, you persist or not with that person. Sometimes they don't come back, but their body starts to instruct them in a different way, and they start to feel, oh, that's interesting. Like I thought that I should feel this, but actually this is happening, and I didn't, but because that's the point. It's the conscious mind is sympathetic and the unconscious mind is not. So
yeah, and actually I've noticed that, like, many times when my work is very yin,
yes,
it's when they feel a lot of activity in their bodies.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's, the first time they can be surprised because I look like I'm doing nothing, and they feel a lot. And sometimes, like, Martha and I took a course in an introduction to polarity, and polarity is just connecting zone.
Yes.
And then there's a lot of movement, and people, like, they shake, and they're surprised you're doing nothing.
Yes. Well, like, again, if you get into this, and this is why I think, again, I'm plugging Western physiology, but to me, it's so interesting because it gets to be so detailed. For example, lacrimation is a parasympathetic function. It's no surprise that if you really take someone to that place, they can start crying. There are mechanisms in the body that happen involuntarily as a result of that part of our being. And these are all names. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to talk about nervous. It doesn't matter, but we can just talk about chi. But it's not all one thing, And when we work, it's not only one quality, and we know that there are different qualities. So I think it is useful to use whatever system you want to use. This, I'm just suggesting this particular system because I've found it very useful, or model, to try to situate what it is that we're actually doing. I think that's helpful. It shouldn't control us, and it shouldn't, make us think, oh, now I've got to do my parasympathetic thing, or now I've got to, no,
No, it's more like a dance. It's
that's
more like a dance that happens.
more like
like,
it's more like a dance. Yeah. And interestingly, Martha, you said, I mean, for me these days, and in the beginning it was a little bit of I had some resistance to it because it wasn't the way I was trained. I would say I was trained in Zen Shiatsu and full body treatment and working from the kyo and, the basic principles of that approach. But once I started to integrate Shiatsu into my acupuncture sessions, I had less time, right? I had less time. And what I found was, I had all sorts of questions in the early days, like, should I do it in the beginning? Should I do it at the end? Maybe in the beginning they need to relax, they need to do some parasympathetic stuff and they'll relax, and then the acupuncture will be better. Funny enough, the last number of years, I do Shiatsu at the end. And the Shiatsu that I do is actually a little bit more stimulating. I usually go to the yang areas of the body, and I usually basically try to improve blood flow and move the chi, like disperse a bit. So I've kind of almost, within the acupuncture setting, I've almost like betrayed my Masanaga training. Once in a while, I do a full body treatment and I go back to, because in my own case, I use the first round of needles in a very similar way to the Zen Shiatsu. I find that the weakest single pulse, and I use the mother points to stimulate in the first round of needling. So in a sense, I'm using the kyo to release tension in the body in that first round of needling. So so I am doing a kind of Masanaga thing, but with needles. And then I use Shiatsu at the end. So everybody's different. I mean, that could change again in the future for me, but
Nigel, when you say then you take the pulse, you go for the weakest
Mhm.
as Kyo, that's your reference for Kyo. And then when you say you use the mother points, are you talking about the 5 phase?
5 phase, yes, 5 phase mother point. So, any given, I mean, the simple one would be if you have an earth pulse or a spleen pulse is weak, then, well, that's not a simple one, actually. Let me take the metal. So if the metal is weak, if the lung pulse is weak, then the mother of metal is earth. So you choose the earth point on the metal channel and the earth point on the earth channel, right?
Okay.
So those are, there will be 4 points basically. And the method is tonification. So yes, that's that. I backed off from the earth finding because the mother of earth is fire, of course, but the fire points are quite dynamic, as we know. They're Jingwell points. So in that protocol, in other words, if I had a patient whose spleen pulse was the weakest pulse, I would not use heart 2 and spleen 2. No. I would go to another way of thinking. I use the source point. So spleen 3. And I wouldn't use heart anyway because we tonify through the pericardium. So I use pericardium 7, spleen 3, for example. Does that make sense? I mean, but yeah, that's my version of the Masanaga, root treatment, we call it. And then my second phase of needling is very based on the presenting signs and the complaints of the patient. And then I do Shiatsu after that. Yes.
Awesome.
Usually to the yang parts of the body and the posterior part, neck and shoulders and upper back and stuff. If I have a little bit more time, then I may do more. If people are needle shy or whatever, then I'll do more Shiatsu on the table. Although I still do floor Shiatsu occasionally. Yeah, I did the other day, for example, which I love.
Going back to the roots.
Yes, going back to the roots, and it's really just laziness and convenience that has made me adapt to the table, because you have your office, and to take the table up and down and put the I'd love to have a dedicated Shiatsu room, but it's Manhattan space is expensive. So for the amount of dedicated floor Shiatsu that I do, it would be not really very sensible to have a whole room just for that.
No.
Yeah, I think.
But thank you for talking about that, because for me it's always maybe a curiosity on how you play with 3 branches of Chinese medicine that are very complementary but different: the Shiatsu, the herbology, and the acupuncture, and how you combine them in a real life situation when there's a person there with
Yes.
some symptoms, with a pulse that doesn't necessarily fit the symptoms always. So
That's
I like
right.
that you talk about how you play with this reality.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's
Yeah.
been a long time sort of coming to figure out, and I'm sure I'm not there yet, but you know, you change over time, but I'm comfortable where I am, at least with where I've got to in terms of how to emphasize things.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
sorry to Laura's intervention. I think I would like to know from you how you see each method more specific, if it's more specific for which case. I don't know if I make myself clear, but how you choose between Kampo or Shiatsu or acupuncture with a person that comes the first time and it doesn't ask you to do, you know,
yes.
like some people come and I just want herbs. That's simple. You just try to give herbs. Maybe you can, if you see that acupuncture or shiatsu could be better, you can, you know, suggest. But if it's not the case, how you choose or how you see what technique is better for what?
Mm. Well, I probably told this story before, but one of my acupuncture teachers, not Kampo teachers, always used to say when you are, because sometimes patients would ask that question, more or less, not exactly the same, but they would say, like,
Yeah.
how long do I have to take the herbs, or you know, how often should I come for acupuncture or shiatsu, and which should I do, you know? Like, and he always used to say, you look in the eye, and he said, oh, acupuncture, shiatsu, you come forever. And then herbs, he would say, when the herbs are working, you stop the herbs. So to me, I always remember that, and I do find in my own work that's a little similar. First of all, not every patient that I see gets herbs. I don't know the percentage. Maybe it's probably quite high, but it may be like 70% or something like that. But every single patient I see gets acupuncture and shiatsu, always. So for me, that's not a value judgment of some modality that is somehow better. It's just, it goes back to the sympathetic parasympathetic idea. It goes back to the idea that the most basic form of imbalance has to do with chi. And if your intention is to regulate and try to balance chi, you have to repeat it.
Again and again.
It has to be repeated. It's like therapy. You can't go for one therapy session and change your character. That doesn't work that way. So, but of course we have, you know, concrete, real life challenges to that, meaning it's expensive. And we have to, for patients, for clients, and we have to find ways to either make it less expensive for them, is one way, and offer something, or at the same time, probably try to demonstrate and talk to them in a way that you're not being a salesman, but you're genuinely sharing with them the idea that these subtle energy fluctuations that happen in all of our bodies respond to subtle energy, you know, work, and that has to happen over time. It's not something that can happen quickly, and it really needs to be repeated. Whereas herbs are a form of chemistry, right? They are yin, they are pure yin. They're taken in to the yin, they're absorbed into your bloodstream, and they do have targets, and they will do what they're designed to do. It's like chemistry. It's not adaptive in that sense. That's why we have to be so careful with certain herbs, because maybe you've misunderstood something and you've given a certain herb that is not appropriate. But that herb's going to do what it's supposed to do, and that may not be the right thing. So that's why we have more contraindications with herbs and stuff like that. Some people would like to make the argument that that somehow makes herbal medicine superior in some sort of weird way, which is frankly is nonsense. And in fact, it's easier to master herbs than it is to master acupuncture and shiatsu, in my opinion, because there is a limited knowledge. And once you acquire it and you really know it, it's like mathematics. you can manage mathematics, but you can't manage the liberal arts and literature. And to me,
Nice.
acupuncture is like writing an essay that you never, it's always open-ended. So it beautifully open-ended, but it means, well, you're either going to have a sense of frustration about that, but hopefully, preferably, you're going to have a respect for the fact that, yes, it's always going to be a little bit unpredictable, the results and also where you're going with it. But nonetheless, it's real, and you're engaged with it in a very interactive way, which once you understand herbs very well, it's not I mean, it's powerful and it's very helpful therapeutically, but it's sort of ABC, you know. If you really understand the herbs and your diagnosis gets pretty good, you're just going to be able to fix that thing fairly quickly. But then it's to know when to stop, because that's a short-term thing usually. So I don't know if that answers the question a little bit, but
Yes.
As time goes on, I have more and more respect for energy work, because I think it's on the part of the receiver, I think it's that, it requires more of a willingness to open themselves, to change. And that's very, I don't know what the word is. It's very noble, and it's very beautiful, actually. Because in other words, you can't do it to them, right? We can't do it to them unless they are open. I think herbs, frankly, you can give someone herbs, you're going to do it to them. Hopefully you're going to do the right thing to them. But, and again, I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that they're very different. And
It's interesting. Sorry.
the other thing about the herbs, just to finish that thought about the energy work, is not only that the other is required or needs to come to by themselves, for themselves, to a state of openness to receive, but you as the practitioner also have a lot to work to do, right? So it's not just about knowledge. That's the thing.
Yes.
It's not just about. Now, I also believe that herbs are not just about knowledge. Knowledge is very important in herbs, but there is also inevitably and always the patient interaction. And I think in some ways, some of the herbal training that I've seen is missing that. And that's why I love in Kampo, why we have the abdominal palpation that takes you into the intimate place. So to me, herbs is not abstract in that sense. It's still very intimate, but there is a strong difference. And so for a practitioner of energy work, whether it's with your hands or with needles, whatever, you also have to, work a lot on yourself and come to this place of, I suppose, accepting the gray areas. I think if you cannot accept gray areas between black and white, it will be very hard to practice what we do.
Yes.
Whereas with herbs, when you come to know them well, you are in the black and white, actually. You're in the black and white a little bit. Not completely, but much more so. So for certain personality types, I think they feel more comfortable with that, because there's a certain level of, yes, I wouldn't say certainty, but there's a certain level of predictability that you can come to. It's like modern medicine with drugs, At a certain point, you know what they do. Now your only problem is you have to figure out if that's going to suit this individual or not. That's your main issue. Whereas with energy work, it's constantly adapting and interactive. And so what I began by saying, and I'll finish by this, is that to me, that kind of work is the most challenging work that we have in our profession. Much more challenging than other branches of the medicine. Yes, I think so.
We surf in the gray. We surf in the gray sea when we're doing shiatsu,
and you've got to be comfortable with that, because I think we all know people in our lives who we also love, but their personality, they're not like, they would not be comfortable with that. And we know patients and clients also who are not comfortable with that. They can't quite, they can't accept that grayness. So it's good to know our limitations and where we're swimming, right? I think.
To know our place in the world.
Yeah.
My comment also goes back. I'll make another comment going back to something you said earlier about the mesenteric response.
Yeah.
Mm.
that I'm sure all of us have experienced this, but we have clients who walk in, and as they sit down for the interview, their hara starts responding right away.
Mm-hmm.
Or as soon as they lie down on the futon, we're still like, I don't know, closing the blinds or something, and the system is already like
Yes.
set shifted
Yeah.
into a different space.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that's quite magical.
Yes, it is.
The sense that the body recognize, usually it's not a first-time client, usually it's someone that's come a few times, and the body recognizes where.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, it's like yoga class or something where as you get more practice, then I think you get, or anything actually, any discipline, the more practice you get, I think the quicker you can go into that space, right? I always have that as a kind of personal challenge of mine at work, especially when I'm doing acupuncture, because I tend to see each client comes for an hour, but I tend to use 2 rooms. So I'm booking patients on the half hour. So for example, on a busy day, I might see, 15 or 16 patients. It's a lot. But I found I can do that. I can't do more. I have Chinese colleagues who will run 3 rooms and 4 rooms. I don't know what. No, that's not possible. But if you think about it, my actual direct face-to-face contact with each person is half an hour. And so within that 1 hour, I'm seeing 2 patients, right? So I never sit down. I'm going between the rooms. And for me, that's enough, because with acupuncture, actually, there is that space that the client needs to be alone. Actually, something's going on there that they want to be attuned to. And I've found over the years, very interestingly, that some people really like that aloneness, and that the space to actually observe and let things happen. And some people much prefer the interactive nature of body work from the beginning to the end. For example, I'm like that. I like to have massage or shiatsu. I don't like to have acupuncture. Not because I don't think it's good. It's just that I don't like that. I feel kind of like, yeah, I like the constant interaction. But in the end, if you think about it, the aim is the same. The aim is just the same. You're looking for the same, both releasing and opening, and then smoothing and balancing. That's what you're looking for. But it has to do with personality types and expectations, and we can use our own models for that, right? The wood type and the water type. Yeah, these types are attracted to different kinds of experiences. That's normal. And it's just, I guess it's our job to try to, once we get to know someone, to maybe figure out, oh, okay, so this is going to be their thing. They're going to love this more than that, or whatever it is, right? That's one of the challenges for us. Not that that's fixed, and people do change, but I suppose fundamentally it takes a lot for someone to change in a very deep sense. Maybe a life trauma or a big crisis, or those things can, what we call, or we refer to as constitution, right? The constitutional tendency, I think, doesn't change so easily or quickly, certainly, although it can. It's certainly, and I've seen that. Yeah.
And I'm curious, Nigel, do you give like Qigong exercise or a recommendation like that for your patients, like to help? We were talking about cost and how they have to come back, but then we can also show them stuff to.
That's a great question, because I think some of you know me relatively well. I often refer to the fact that I don't give much lifestyle advice, especially diet, because I find it's there's so many ideas about diet, so many, and many of them are, and the patients and clients themselves complain of that. They find that it's quite conflictual. Oh, this person says this and this person says the opposite. So I tend to be a little bit cautious about dietary advice, although I will always, where necessary, I will always talk about eating habits and when to eat and how much to eat, and those kinds of Taoist type of ideas that don't really necessarily talk about the specifics of what food, but more about your approach to eating in general. And leaving space and not filling yourself, and all those kinds of things. But with regard to exercise, my opinion has changed, or movement. I used to back off from that, and everyone had their own idea of what's good for you. And some people think, 2 hours in the gym, like sweating and doing weights, that's good for me. And other people thrash around on the squash court, and other people do Tai Chi, So I sort of thought, well, you know what, I just leave people to that. But nowadays I do Qigong with clients. Yeah, I do. Actually quite a lot.
And what made you change your mind?
Well, actually, that's a good question. I have a friend in England, who I see. Actually, I saw him last summer. We were very, very close in the very early days of when I got back from Japan. He had studied martial arts mostly, but also acupuncture and shiatsu in Japan himself. He's about 10 years older than me, so he'd studied in the 1970s. He's a very, very strong martial arts guy. A little scary. He has a lot of male energy. He's very, yeah, but he has a great heart. He has a big heart, and yeah, you would not want to be on his wrong side in a dark alley. No, he's definitely, and I've seen a few interactions which are very rare because, as I'm sure we all know, martial arts is really ultimately about never having violence, right? It's ultimately about marshaling your internal energy in a way that no one's going to mess with you because you look like, so you don't have to ever get into a fight, right? But anyway, I mention him because we talk a lot on Messenger, actually, and sometimes I see him in England. He's still very dedicated to his movement work. He developed his whole movement system that he calls Kitaido now, which is it derived from Aikido in the beginning, and then anyway, he's, like I say, now would be 75 or so. He looks amazing. He's still very strong, but his martial arts has become a lot more internalized and softer, a lot softer. And always when I'm talking with him, he always says to me, this is the base of everything. You got to understand, like, if you're, Nigel, he has this London accent. He says, Nigel, you're still doing acupuncture. How come you don't get burned out? You gotta do the qigong, mate. If you don't do qigong, you're fucked. That's it. So and this has been for years like this. And I studied with him in London. So to go back to the beginning of the story, I started my Shiatsu school in London in 1987. And Ken, his name is, he already had a Shiatsu school going. Shiatsu was very popular in England at that time, the end of the 80s and the 90s. There were a bunch of schools. Anyway, so he and I became guest lecturers for each other's school. And I used to do a lot of Zen Shiatsu stuff with his students. And he used to come, and in the park, we'd be outside. He used to do these amazing Qigong style workouts with my students. So it started then, all those years ago. So I've always been close to Qigong in my own practice. But over the last 10 to 15 years, in interactions with Ken, he's made me see that, you need to share that with people. And that means actually demonstrating stuff. And sometimes I do a whole class with them. And if they're interested, we do stuff. I found that really rewarding, actually. It's a big change in my practice. I didn't used to do that.
Yeah, and it's like giving the power back to the person.
It's
instead,
empowering.
because a lot of problems, can be solved by training, by knowing your body better,
especially
better
emotional
posture.
especially emotional things. That's what I've noticed most of all in New York City, where a good percentage of my people come. It's basically emotional issues, and learning to direct your chi in that way is very, as you
Learning
said,
to breathe.
because listen, they come once a week, they're on my table, and when they leave, they feel usually, hopefully, $1 million. That's only once a week. So, it's something you can do every day, and sometimes several times a day. I mean, my Qigong practice now, because of kids and whatever, I can't do 2 hours in the morning anymore. So I do through the day, 5 minutes, 10 minutes through the day many times. Usually at the office, I go to the bathroom, which is a bigger room. And, between patients, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, stand,
Wow.
and then back, So I just do that constantly through the day. That's how my practice is nowadays. Once in a while, I might go on a retreat or do something more intensive, but I don't usually have time for that. Same with my sitting meditation, the same. Used to be, oh, let's go on the 5-day retreats and do all these things. And it was wonderful and challenging and beautiful. I don't have time for that. So every day, 20 minutes or half an hour, in the morning when I first wake up and sometimes at night. Yeah.
And
So
what differences you see since you do that, those like 5 minutes of Qigong here and there?
I don't get tired. I don't get tired during treatments. I feel energized. I also metabolize, I think I metabolize other people's problems better. And that's possibly the most important thing.
What do you mean metabolize?
In a healthy way. Meaning a healthy way would be that it doesn't disturb you, right?
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure we've all had experiences, and I could, there's tears in my eyes when I think of some experiences. But the problem with that is, it's not a problem, but when you are very connected to certain things, especially when suffering is involved, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to experience that. But we have a duty to find a way to metabolize that, because otherwise we will suffer and we will not be helpful. I mean, that's the way I think of it.
Yes.
I have a lot of ALS patients at the moment for some reason. I have about 5 or 6. And this is really a horrible disease, It's just, there is no description for it. And usually, I will never say never, but usually it has a very, short prognosis, so 3 to 5 years or so. And to work with someone in that stage, especially if they're married, they have kids, it's really hard. But of course, you find a way. And so anyway, Qigong helps me a lot with that. Qigong and meditation. It's not like I'm sitting on the cushion thinking about, I've got to let this go. I've got to, you just do it. And somehow or other, there's some kind of osmotic effect that helps to, it's almost like the dream world in a way. I think dreams are a beautiful and natural way to shuffle the cards, and to make things more palatable for us in our conscious mind, especially trauma or difficult things. And Qigong is a form of dreaming in a way. It's not, but it's an altered state. It's an altered state, I think. And so is meditation. So I think it's terribly important to take yourself into those spaces, even if it's only for a short time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea, because sometimes like I tell myself, oh, if I don't have 20 minutes, oh, I'm not going to do it today.
Right. Yes, it's not worth it if I can't do it properly. But what's properly? Sometimes 5 minutes can seem a long time, and you go very deep, So, think of
very good idea.
Think of all the treatments you've given where sometimes the patient goes so deep, so quickly, and then they sort of come back and they think it's been like 2 hours or something, but actually it's 5 minutes, So this is not, time is not really exactly how we think about it, I think. Yeah. But,
So I want to come back to a question I had before that it came again to my
came
mind.
back. Yay.
Yes. So it's like me, I don't know, what do you think? I want to ask you your opinion. When I work with the herbs, I am thinking to influence or to act in the yin aspect of the body. And it's like directive information that I give to the body of the person. When I was working with acupuncture, I think it's almost the same. Like I put the needle and it's also like a yang stimulation. It's very directive. And then when I do shiatsu, it's like I feel like it's more yin, it's more like an invitation. And I always, when I teach, I always say that, but I just want to know, what do you think about that? What do you think about between acupuncture and shiatsu? These two techniques, as for me, I think a different point. Yeah.
I think it's always possible, if you compare between disciplines, to talk about relatively more yin or more yang. That's the nature of yin and yang, right? So by comparison, it's always possible to do that. And in that hierarchy, I would suggest the herbs are the most yin in that sense. I agree. But I think within each discipline, there is yin and yang. So
yeah, there are nuances.
Yes, well, and not so complicated. You know, you think of Zen Shiatsu and the kind of touch that Masanaga was trying to share and teach. I would say that's very yin. I would say it's really parasympathetically organized. It's both yin in yourself, because it's not requiring any strength or physical power, right? It's all about positioning and resting pressure, which doesn't require effort. And so all of those things to me are yin. And yet within Shiatsu as a broad discipline, there are many other styles, right? And went to Namikoshi a few times to that school. Each knee, you know, down the back and the shoe points, like, whoa, that's like, okay, that's very different. And you did feel kind of like, you know, you were awake in the treatment, very much alert. You kind of felt what they're doing, like physiotherapy. You know, it's interactive in a very conscious, deliberately conscious way, and it has its own effects. But so I think within every discipline, and even with acupuncture, you know, I agree. A certain type of needle stimulation is exactly that. It's stimulating. But a lot of the Japanese needling styles, for example, are very, very gentle. And we don't manipulate the needle at all. So those actually are, you know, in the root treatment I was talking about earlier, the root acupuncture first phase with the weakest single pulse. When I mention tonification, it doesn't mean, like in standard Chinese textbooks, they talk about rotating the needle clockwise, etc. There's tonification in Japanese style is no stimulation, which means the needle should be very shallowly inserted with the least amount of stimulation possible and then left. That's considered tonifying because it has this kind of, you know, soft, non-invasive quality to it. And yet there are many other styles of acupuncture so different. You know, in China, I saw so many things where they were treating sciatica with needles like this, you know, and straight into gallbladder 30 and wow, you know, and the patient was looking like, yes, I like, you know, like how different can it be? But it's still acupuncture, you know? So, and it still has an effect. So I think like that. I think, yes, you can compare them discipline against discipline, but within each discipline, there's a big range of styles and effects, I think. Even herbs, which is so yin and full of chemistry and working on the yin of the body. If you have certain herbs that target the GI tract, for example, simple herbs like ginger or datsa, jujube, or licorice for that matter, they actually affect the functionality of the digestive system. So that's a yang function, isn't it? Actually, a lot of herbs, or many herbs, we call them the qi category of herbs. They don't really add to substance in the body. They actually focus on stimulation of function or regulation of function. So even within herbs, we have functional formulas as opposed to substantial formulas, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Ancha, you know that formula very well.
Yes.
That's a qi formula. And it doesn't really, there's no addition, there's no adding into the body of any profound substance or chemistry. It's just looking at, you know, opening here, settling qi, relax, right? So it's a qi formula. So that works very similarly to acupuncture in that, or to certain kinds of acupuncture. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Or
isn't
like
it-
stretching, like shiatsu, we do
yes,
stretching.
yes. I think
Yeah.
that's the beauty. That's the beauty of our medicine, isn't it? Is that
Mm.
you don't have to do lots of different disciplines. One is enough. But
Mhm.
within that one, you have a lot of span, a lot of
Mhm.
élan to, really approach things from different points of view.
Mhm.
And if you happen to practice several disciplines like I do, that's okay too. But sometimes in some ways it's a bit complicated. I'm not sure that it's always necessary. It's like, you have the plates. How many plates do you want to spin? You have a few, it's more difficult. And you're more likely to make mistakes.
Mm,
Sometimes one thing is good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I have a last question that is
Yeah.
not related of what we are talking just right now, but it was a long time in the conversation before
do I
about
like do I like poutine? No.
You don't
Although
like
I had a good
poutine?
one time. You remember that place opposite
Yes.
us?
yes, 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 yes,
That
la
was
banquise.
I think
Yeah.
I think I went there at least one time because there was always a line, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think we got in there one time. It was pretty okay. I could eat it.
But
No, but it
it's for
wasn't that good.
one time visit only. That's
Yeah,
poutine.
one time only.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you weren't going to ask that question.
Yeah. So talking about poutine, the question is about the mesenterium, I think, English,
Okay.
because I was searching about it the other day. I was watching. Actually, I don't remember how I get the information, and is this considered the new organ? The
The mesenteric.
recover.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was looking at that video and I was thinking, oh, maybe this is like the triple warmer that we talk about.
Yeah, maybe.
Triple heater, yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. So what? No, do you know some, like, because we are talking about the enteric system and the mesenterium looks like
Mhm.
part of that. Do you know? Do you have some insights about what I am trying to convey?
Well, I don't know about insights, but I have an opinion. I mean, I think
Yes.
the triple H is always, or the triple warmer has always been a little mysterious, hasn't it?
Mm.
At least it has to me. Um, you know, the function without organ
Mm.
is the way it's often described, and yet I think there is an organ, and I think it does include the mesentery organ, which includes the omentum, the whole
Exactly.
stack. This because these tissues are filled with neuroreceptors. They're filled with
Mm-hmm.
receptors, and it goes back to something I was suggesting earlier, that the way I see, or not the way I see, the way that modern physiology explains actually this deep connection between the endocrine system as a whole and the nervous system. And so maybe when in the old books they talk about, the triple heater is a part or passageway for the exchange of chi and fluids, right? Like throughout the systems. Maybe it's a reference to that, because chi for me is the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Not limited to that, but including that.
Yes.
And fluids include chemicals, hormones, lots of other things within the blood, of course. So in some ways, the mesentery is a sort of symbol of those connections between the yang organs up here that I described before as perhaps having a lot more to do with the sympathetic responses of the body, and the yin organs further down, especially the digestive and the urogenital and sexual organs. So to me, that not only yang and yin connection, but that connection between the substances and chemistry of the body with the dynamic chi and function of the body is almost symbolized by the mesenteric center, right? After all, it's the earth, isn't it? It's the middle. And we go there, don't we? To find things out. Because that's like, you know, Oh, we go to the pulse too, but in some ways the pulse is insufficient. My acupuncture colleagues, I'm sure, would disagree with me, but I never feel that I'm looking for yin information from the pulse, because to me it's a yang aspect of the body. It's near the surface. You feel changes on the pulse very quickly. It betrays all the qualities of qi and the movement of qi, which is why it's so useful. But to think that, oh, I'm feeling like, liver yin deficiency on the pulse, I don't know. I'm not convinced by that. Yeah. So I think a
I
little
think
different.
that depends also the technique, because there are many, as we were saying, like there are many techniques of or styles of shiatsu and acupuncture and herbs. There is also many styles of how to take the information from the pulse, because we have been studying with Francis Bonaldo the pulse, and there are some physical, like very, very objective things that we can palpate in the artery that can give us some idea of the yin part of the body. But for me, it's like very difficult. Like I am, I don't feel, I am not sensitive enough yet, so I'm practicing it. But I think it is, it is possible to have that part.
I'm sure you're right. I guess my question would be, why bother? Because
Exactly.
if you want to assess the yin,
Yeah.
go to the yin. That means the tongue and the abdomen. That's where you find the yin. If you want the yang, go to the pulse, or look at the behavior and the outside, because that's yang, right? Anyway, of course, I agree with you. I'm sure that within the yang, you can find the yin. It's just, it takes a lot. It's a little harder. So
Yes,
I'm not sure why.
I agree.
I'm not sure why we would make it hard for ourselves, The modern Chinese have made it hard for themselves in acupuncture because they stopped using the abdomen. In my opinion, that's like completely ridiculous, because now they only have the pulse. So yeah, of course they say, oh, yeah, but it takes 50 years to get to that point of feeling what you need to feel in the yin and yang of the body from just the pulse.
Yeah, just touching the abdomen, you can feel it in the...
Yeah. So why not do that? And this is part of their medicine, but they threw it out. Or I don't know what they did. They neglected it or something. I don't know why. And it would be similar if it was the other way around. If you only use the abdomen, you might miss something, maybe,
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be the pulse, but there are lots of yang aspects of diagnosing, right? Especially behavioral, manifestation. Yes. Yeah. These are yang ways of observing people's behavior and the way they look. Yeah. Those things belong to yang. So if you can keep that in mind, yeah. But
yes.
Well, this is fun conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love how this flows. The conversation flows from yin and yang, which is so interesting to always come back to. This such basic. We start with this basic theory,
yeah,
and we think we grasp, and then every time we talk about yin and yang, I'm like, oh, and there's that to it. Oh,
yes,
there's that to it, and we can always add more layers to that theory. I love it.
No, so totally true. I remember when I first came to Japan, quite quickly actually, after I started studying Shiatsu and stuff, I met with some people who were involved with macrobiotics and quite deeply. And I don't know if you know much about the history of macrobiotics, but of course in America there was Kushi, who was a big name, and he's still alive, I think. He's lives in Boston, I believe. But the original kind of, I don't know what you would call it, author or inventor of the concept of macrobiotics was George Osawa, his name was, long dead. But when I was in Tokyo, quite quickly I found out that George Osawa's wife, whose name was Lima, was still alive. And she was still teaching cooking classes. She was then in her 80s, actually. So I started to go to these classes because these two other friends of mine were very into it. They said, "Oh, you have to come. It's so interesting." And so I became microbiotic. And I mention this only because on the back of yin and yang, because in microbiotic teaching, the way they think about yin and yang is actually almost
The opposite.
opposite.
Some aspects.
Some aspects. And it took me a long time to start to realize, oh, yeah, there's no conflict here. It's just, it seems in the beginning a little strange, like if energy is condensing or expanding, what is that? But actually it's all about the context, isn't it?
Yes.
In this context, this is yin and this is yang, but in another context it can be reversed. So that's it took me a little while to figure that out, and then I realized, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So
when we started our Shiatsu classes, the way I was taught with Stéphane Vien, and this is the way I teach it now, I start with the basics of yin and yang from the microbiotic
oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Perspective, because it makes so much sense when you're touching the body to have that perspective of yin and yang, since you're talking about the physical. And you're looking for kyo, so you're looking for lack of density.
Lack of something. Yes.
So but we bring it to the yin side, and people are like, no, but the diffused energy is chi. So it's always very interesting conversations.
Yes. Fascinating. Yes.
Well, I think we're way more over an hour now, guys.
Exactly. I was waiting for your call, Sophie. I saw your.
But it was so interesting. Yes. So yeah, it's hard to stop. But...
Well, it's great to talk to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nigel.
Yeah.
It was great to see you and to have this wonderful chat with you.
Yeah, this is an example of how more than 1 hour looks like 5 minutes.
There you go. There you go. And hopefully one day I might see you in Montreal again.
Yes.
Well, I have many ideas. You know, we talk about Fukushin, we talk about Shiatsu. You wanted to come back to basics, so why not, Nigel? Come to Montreal and do a seminar. Maybe a week and 3 days or something like that.
We can talk in Toronto in a couple. It's
less
than 2 weeks.
Yes. Next week.
Next week. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. But meantime, I'm going to Vancouver on Friday, so I'm very happy about that.
Nice.
I decided to reward myself with, that's the wrong word, but anyway, I decided to take some time to myself, and with my sister, we're going to just experience the forests and lakes of British Columbia and just be outside. So I'll go Friday, and then I come to Toronto straight from there.
Oh, good for you.
You know, when this podcast will come out, we are going to be in New York in our retreat.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
People, while you are watching us, now we are in New York, in a retreat. It's going to be very interesting.
Yes. I'll be sending you an email later today reminding you of some things that I'm expecting to hear from.
I sent it. I sent it on Saturday. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't see it yet. Right. You're very reliable. I know I asked for the 16th of April, so I think you're a day ahead.
Yes.
Good. Wow. I'm impressed. I didn't hear from any of the others yet.
Okay.
That's all good. It's all good. Okay.
Good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nigel, and hopefully see you soon.
Yes, likewise. Okay. Love to everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye for now. Bye.